I'm going to start out by thanking all those who worked on the Christmas decorations yesterday and a little bit earlier this week. There's Carla Golden, Gail Gibson, Michael Massey, Luis and Sal worked on the front wall here too, so appreciate everybody's efforts. And as I mentioned, grab an ornament and put it on the tree there on the way out. So, good morning. I'm a football fan, and of course the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are playing the 49ers today up at Raymond James Stadium. 49ers, I remember as a kid, being a football fan and wondering, what does 49ers mean? And I learned it had to do with the gold rush in California. In 1848, gold was discovered out there, and of course word spread, so people just started heading towards California for the gold rush, and suddenly the population and the economy there in California just mushroomed. I mean, San Francisco went from like 200 people to about 36,000 people in a matter of a couple of years. So in addition to all these people who were out there looking for gold, there were people who were going out there to look how to merchandise to those people who were looking for gold. And one gentleman had a family that owned dry goods stores in the East and in St. Louis, and so he went out to San Francisco to open up a dry goods store. And one of the things that they thought would sell very well would be this navy canvas fabric for tents. But when he got out there, he found that, well, most of the people who were out there in the wilderness already had tents, but what they really needed was pants. And so someone came up with the idea, well, why don't we take this canvas fabric that we've got an abundance of and make pants out of it? At the same time, there was a gentleman in Reno, Nevada, who was a tailor, and he was tailoring these pants out of this fabric, and he'd get it from the dry goods store there in San Francisco. And the railroad came through Reno, and one of the wives of a railroad worker came to Jacob, who was the tailor, and said, every time my husband puts stuff in and out of his pockets, the seams tear. Is there some way you can reinforce the seams of his pants? And Jacob gave it some thought, and he noticed that harnesses for horses and stuff had these copper rivets. So he went ahead and put the rivets in the seams, and her husband loved them. And of course, as people started to notice around him that his pants were a little bit different, they wanted some too. And suddenly Jacob was kind of like swamped with orders for pants with the rivets in them. And so he contacted the owner of the dry goods store and told him the situation there. And the owner of the store's name was Levi Strauss. And he thought, wow, this is a fantastic idea. In fact, you could probably get a patent on that. And since Levi had worked on patents before, he went ahead and paired up with a fellow named Jacob Davis in Reno, and they formed the Blue Jeans Company of the Levi Strauss Company. And of course, that's how it all started. Unity has what we call the prosperity principles, and often imitated, never duplicated. There have been many evangelical churches that have been criticized for teaching the prosperity gospel, which is essentially, just give us 10% of all you got and you'll be rich. Well, that's an incredible oversimplification of prosperity. In Unity, we believe in true prosperity, the full spectrum of prosperity, meaning that an abundance comes in areas of our life like health and occupation and relationships and spiritual growth, and yes, enough money to pay our bills. And this is one of the truth principles. As Unity started out in 1889 with the healing of Myrtle Fillmore. She had tuberculosis, learned that by meditation and prayer, especially focused on the organs of her body and the chakras, she was able to heal herself of tuberculosis when there was no medical cure. And so Unity was, a lot of people would call themselves truth students in Unity, and you had Unity truth centers all over the place. And as time went by, some people started shying away from using truth students because there was that implication that, hey, we know the truth and you don't, sort of a thing. But as Charles and Myrtle Fillmore often pointed out, the word truth in truth, as far as unity was concerned, is these spiritual principles that have been tested over time and proved. And that's why they're called the truth principles, not meaning to be overbearing, but Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free," in the Gospel of John, 8th chapter, 31st verse. So these spiritual principles are the teachings of Jesus Christ. And what we discover is we build our spiritual consciousness by following these principles. So if Jesus says, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free," what are you set free from? And that is illusions, or more properly, delusions. We have to first recognize there's no need for us to be more spiritual, because we're already spiritual beings having a human experience. And if we accept that, then we can build a consciousness of that awareness, finding ourselves more times during the day being aware that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And suddenly all of these outer appearances that are appearing out here, we recognize can often be a projection of our own stuff onto the world and feeding back to us. So a lot of times there's outer appearances that, if we're willing to recognize that they are maybe a mirage, an illusion, and we understand the truth that God is our source of all things, we can live a life of abundance. Jesus consistently taught prosperity. In fact, half of his parables are just helping people get by in his world. And of course, the unity prosperity principles. There have been many unity authors who have written books on prosperity, and we've got plenty in the bookstore. There are more popular offerings. But there is what I would call the true idea of prosperity, and then the illusion of prosperity. So let's dig into that a little bit deeper. As I said, true prosperity is recognizing that I'm placing my faith in the only place that it can really be placed for an effective and spiritual life, and that is place faith in God as I know God to be. And if I place my faith there and recognize that God is my source, then I'll start living a life that's more pleasant and has more abundance in all these various areas of my life. If, however, I place my faith in other things, in ideas and stuff that are going on in the world, then I'm going to find myself to be disappointed. I'll have this illusion of prosperity where I attach my belief to the wrong things. Let me give you an example. The Gospel of Matthew, 6th chapter, 19th verse, one of the times that Jesus talked about this. Jesus said, "Do not store for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume, and where thieves break in and steal. But store for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light. If your eye is not single, your whole body will be full of darkness." So, in this passage, Jesus speaks of what we store on earth. We have things like property, we have possessions, we have positions, we have money, we have relationships. These are treasures of earth. And let me be clear, these are good things. These are things that we want to have in our life. They're good to have and they're right for us to enjoy, as long as we're enjoying them in the proper way. And by that I mean, we're careful not to start worshiping these things. Start worshiping material. Start worshiping what we see in the world, rather than recognizing that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. If they become our focus, we remember that whatever we focus on expands in our life. And so, we get all caught up in getting and having, and I'm afraid that we're going to lose things in the physical world. The things that moth and rust consume and thieves break in and steal. Truth is, things in the physical world change. Circumstances change. I know before the 9 o'clock someone was describing how he'd lost the position he'd had for some time with this particular company. And he started realizing that he was looking at this company as his security. And if you're so suddenly that sense of security was shattered. But if you recognize that, okay, perhaps this is a divine order that God is saying, you've done all that you need to do there, you need to move on. There's something better for you beyond where you were. That's a whole different attitude. And that's placing your faith in God rather than in the XYZ company. So let's talk about true prosperity. Spiritual consciousness, our ever-growing awareness that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. Jesus says, lay up for yourself treasures in heaven. Now in the Gospels, Jesus refers to the kingdom of God and the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of God is that realm of God that never changes. God is always there, constant, and we are part of that God energy. The kingdom of heaven, when Jesus mentions that, that's the growing spiritual awareness. The more and more we realize that as we work through the day and face our challenges, we're keeping our faith in that God presence rather than what we're seeing in the physical world. So when Jesus says, let your eye be single, what he's saying is, what are you looking at? What are you focused on? If you're placing your faith in God, it doesn't really matter what happens in the world, what changes happen. And so an affirmation I use often, especially when things are a little bit challenging in the financial department, is God is my source, or God is our source. God is our source, not our jobs, not our spouses, not the Social Security Administration. These are all things, channels through which our good comes. But God is the source. It's kind of like using the example of the water system here in Tampa. They draw water, from wells and all of that. So there's this wellspring of God, but it comes through all of these various faucets or nozzles or fountains. These are all ways that we can draw from that energy, and we are just bathing in divine substance. Divine substance. This entire world is made up of vibrating energy. Vibrating molecules, atoms. And when we speak our affirmative prayers into that, these molecules actually start to vibrate. So the divine substance can be expressed in so many different ways. In our health, in our occupation, in our relationships, in our spiritual growth, and yes, in our money. The key is for us to just kind of get our bloated nothingness out of the way. Get our ideas or our fears out of the way. Society has taught us, so many of us, to be scared about money, or to be fearful about money, or to be fearful about the economy, etc., etc. These are all things that we need to just let go of and allow that substance to flow through us in many ways. Now, I remember one person once saying, well, who cares? I mean, what difference does it really make if I affirm God is my source, Well, what the difference is what Jesus talks about here. If your eye is single, then you'll be full of light. But if your eye is not single, your whole body will be full of darkness. Well, a lot of people see darkness and they think evil and devil. Well, no, what? If you've ever been in darkness, you have a lot of difficulty seeing anything. So if you're not seeing things, then you can get confused, you can be ignorant of things, or you can fall into despair or fear. These are all areas of our life that we need to, are we coming from love or are we coming from fear? Are we coming from love or are we coming from fear in any particular situation? So in manifesting prosperity in our lives, God is my source. And the various aspects of prosperity come through many different channels in my life. My health, my occupation, my relationships, my spiritual growth, my money. So, we can worship one great source. God is our source. The one presence, the one power in the universe and in our lives. God, the good, omnipotent. I'm going to ask Duncan to put up a slide of our takeaways for this week. So I encourage you this week to work with what we've talked about here today. Recognize the truth. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, are these spiritual principles. You know, that unity and some of the other related new thought movements, you know, have been teaching now for so many years. We shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Store up your treasures in heaven. If we're storing our treasures in heaven, we're building that consciousness so that whatever happens to us, if we lose our job, or if we have a health challenge, or if we have a relationship suddenly go south on us, or suddenly it doesn't look like there's enough money, it's okay. I know that this spiritual substance will manifest through some coincidence in my life, or some sort of thing will happen. I'll get that divine idea like Levi Strauss and Jacob Davis, whatever it is. Sure enough, it's all there. And then use the affirmation, God is our source, and that God works through many channels. In fact, whenever I sign a check, I write, God is my source above my signature. And whenever I'm paying something online, you know, I just remember to bless any money that comes through my life so that there can be a multiplied return coming back. Okay, so remember the 5 categories of full spectrum prosperity: occupation, health, occupation, relationships, spiritual growth, and money. And they can come through these various channels: our job, our family, our friends, our homes, our organizations, our institutions. These are all ways that prosperity can come into our life. And know that if our eye is single, our world, our life will be full of, our whole body will be full of life. And in God's light, there is no lack, there is no disappointment, there is no bitterness. There is one more sentence in this Bible passage I hadn't touched on yet, and that is, for wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So if we're building up treasure in heaven, we find that that treasure is that spiritual awareness. It has been stored in perfect alignment with the heart of God. And what a wonderful place for our heart to be. And that is one of the nicest ways to express our divine substance, is in love. To other people, to other, well, whatever you want to express love towards. You know, this entire planet is full of things that we can express love for. And our closing video is about a man who found a way to consistently and uniquely express that love of God.